Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I find no joy, no pleasure in bringing forth the amendment before us. This amendment, which would add unborn persons as a protected class, is before us today out of necessity due to our inaction. I am saddened that this body has failed in our most basic responsibilities in safeguarding our citizens, all citizens, the right to life, a right granted to us by God and vouchsafed in the Constitution. Life itself is not something created by government. It is not something we can replicate. What it is sacred. It is, in fact, the very reason we stand here today to debate this issue. For if not for life itself, none of us would be here today. It was George Washington who said, "Truth will ultimately prevail where there are pains taken to bring it to light." Isn't that our responsibility this day and every day? This issue is not complicated. It's not a complicated issue as some would have us believe. It is a simple issue. However, it is an issue that unfortunately many do not want to discuss the details of what it truly is. Colleagues, we must have a transparent and honest conversation of what abortion is. The details are not glamorous. Rather, they are gruesome, graphic, and even barbaric. I will describe now the different types of abortion that have been utilized and very well could be being utilized at this very moment somewhere in this state, and most assuredly being done somewhere throughout this nation. First trimester abortions include chemical and medical abortions as well as surgical. For women 5 to 9 weeks pregnant, the RU-486 as well as methotrexate, also known as chemical abortion, basically do the same thing. That is, they attack fast-growing cells and deprive the baby of food, oxygen, and the fluids needed to survive. The next abortion procedure is called suction aspiration. A powerful suction tube with a sharp cutting edge is inserted into the womb through the cervix. This is a suction catheter. Not one that would be used in abortions, but would look very similar to that used in abortions. A powerful suction tube with a sharp cutting edge would literally suck the baby into mush and fluid. It dismembers the body as it sucks it through this catheter, as well as tearing the placenta from the wall of the uterus. The next type of abortion, called dilatation and curettage, the cervix is dilated or stretched to permit the insertion of a loop-shaped steel knife called a curette. The body of the baby is cut into pieces and removed, and the placenta is scraped off the uterine wall. Blood loss from what's known as a DNC, or mechanical curettage, is greater for this than suction aspiration. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Anthony Levitino, an OBGYN doctor who has performed over 12,000 abortions, described one of the methods of a second trimester surgical abortion called dilatation and evacuation, also known as D&E. This is performed between 13 and 24 weeks. The size of these babies range from 3.5 inches to 8 inches, not including the legs. In Dr. Levitino's own words, quote, "Because second trimester babies are so large, this great access requires a late-term abortion. Late-term abortion requires that the cervix be prepared 24 to 48 hours in advance with laminaria. Laminaria is a seaweed that absorbs over 8 to 12 hours and swells to several times its original diameter. Once removed, the dilators can be used to further open the cervix as needed. The suction unit is placed inside the machine, placed inside, and the machine is turned on. A baby at 20 weeks, again, is the length of my hand plus half of my hand, not including the legs, from head to rump. Once the machine is turned on, a pale yellow amniotic fluid surrounding the baby is suctioned through the catheter. When babies are this size, they don't fit through catheters. The baby's bones and skull are too strong to be torn apart by a suction alone. A sulfur clamp made of stainless steel is about 13 inches long. It is placed in the womb. State your point.
Point of order has been raised. Senator Bisignano, state your point.
Madam President, as I see the amendment, he has chosen to put an unborn fetus, if that's a term. I didn't get a paper copy of this amendment. But he's explaining a medical procedure that I don't know how it falls under the definition of this bill is either adding or taking out anyone, but the procedure itself being described in detail I don't find to be in order.
Senator, will you confine your remarks to your amendment itself?
It's completely relevant. It is absolutely relevant to why
Senator Chapman, Senator Bisignano, please come to the well. Senator Bisignano, what we have done in this chamber is always given senators a lot of latitude during debate. However, Senator Chapman, I will ask you to confine your remarks on making the case on why unborn status ought to be included in Iowa's hate crimes statute.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me continue because I think it is very relevant. This is not an easy conversation. As I outlined, I find no joy in describing what's happening to these babies. But it is vitally important that this chamber, members of this body, understand what is occurring to lay the framework of why this amendment is relevant and important, why we're adding unborn status to hate crimes. Let me continue. A sulfur clamp is made of stainless steel.
Senator, state your point.
Madam President, I clearly heard you, as other members did in this chamber, that you asked the senator to confine his remarks to the amendment. He chose to directly go back to the same speech he was given when I called the first point of order. I would ask the senator to confine his remarks to the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Bisignano. Senator Chapman, please come to your point on why unborn status should be included in our hate crimes law.
I'm trying to get there, and I hope the media is paying attention, because this is what happens in this body. You don't like what you hear, so you call a point of order.
Senator, it's not that no one in this room likes hearing what you have to say. Just make your point, make the case on why this should be included in our hate crimes law.
So I will continue to describe what is happening to babies because it is completely relevant. Completely. Just as we will hear Senator McCoy talk about transgenders and what's happening to them. And he has every right to talk about those issues, just as I have every right to lay the framework and case as to why we must protect all life. So I will continue to give my speech as prepared. The doctor will use the clamp and squeeze the clamp until it grabs onto something in a D&E procedure, and will pull limb by limb. The head is the size of a plum at this age. large plum. He will take that clamp and grab the head of that baby and squeeze. He knows he's successful in that procedure when white fluid comes out of the cervix. That is the baby's brains. Let me talk about chemical abortions. Salt poisoning, also known as saline amniocentesis, or salting out, hypertonic saline abortion. This technique is used after 16 weeks of pregnancy, when enough fluid has accumulated around the amniotic fluid sac surrounding the baby. A needle is inserted. I don't have a needle on this. Would use a cc syringe, just like this, would insert a needle into the abdomen of the mother, would draw out amniotic fluid and replace it with a solution. This is sterile water. This is not real solution that they would use, but it would be about this amount. Would inject it into the womb. The baby breathes it in, swallowing the salt, and is poisoned. The chemical solution also causes painful burning and deterioration of the baby's skin. Usually after about an hour, the child dies. The mother goes into a labor about 33 to 35 hours after installation and delivers a dead, burned, and shriveled baby. Imagine, if you will, being poisoned with muriatic acid, bleach, or some other type of acid, and literally being burned both internally and externally by the acid for the next hour. Imagine, if you will, being caged up in a bathtub and soaking in this painful acid as it literally burns you alive. What is humane about that? In August 1977, a 19-year-old girl, pregnant with a beautiful baby girl, went to one of our very own hospitals, St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City. That 19-year-old girl has an abortion committed against her own will. She utilized the salting method, or saline infusion, the method I had just described. After 5 days, not an hour, not a day, but five days. She went back into the hospital thinking she would be delivering a dead baby. However, this was not the case. A baby girl was delivered, but she was delivered alive. Even more disturbing is that it was the baby's maternal grandmother, who was the nurse, who delivered her in the final step of the abortion process. Furthermore, the grandmother, after learning that her granddaughter had not successfully died in the process, demanded that this little baby be left to die. This baby, now a full-grown adult, relayed the following, quote, I know where babies like me were left to die. I met a nurse that worked there who delivered a child much like me in 1976. She delivered a little boy after a failed saline infusion abortion, but she followed her superior's orders and she placed him there in a utility closet in a bucket of formaldehyde to be picked up later as medical waste. After he was left there to die alone, a bucket of formaldehyde in a utility closet was meant to be my fate. After I survived the abortion attempt, that woman is one of the biggest advocates for ending abortion and protecting life, as does this amendment. One of the most gruesome types of abortion, partial birth abortions, 20 to 32 weeks. Abortionists sometimes refer to these or similar types of abortions using obscure clinical sounding euphemisms such as D and X or intact D&E. Partial birth abortion is used to abort women who are 20 to 32 weeks pregnant or even later into pregnancy. Guided by an ultrasound, the abortionist reaches into the uterus, grabs the unborn baby's legs with forceps, and pulls the baby into the birth canal. Except for the head, which is deliberately kept just inside the womb. At this point, in a partial birth abortion, the baby is alive. Then the abortionist uses scissors and cuts into the back of the baby's skull and spreads the tips of the scissors apart to enlarge the wound. After removing the scissors, a suction catheter is placed into the skull and the baby's brains are sucked out. The collapsed head is then removed from the uterus. Colleagues, I'm reminded of a man who we revere. That individual, William Wilberforce, fought to outlaw the slave trade in Britain, a position that was not popular at the time, but with time and through educating, he was at last successful in his quest. At the close of his speech in the House of Commons regarding the slave trade, he ended with this quote, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you did not know." Madam President, we have only begun to touch the tip of the consequences of allowing and sanctioning the killings of future generations of Iowans. We provide special classification for crimes against specific groups of people. If anyone should receive special recognition as a special class, it ought to be for these individuals who physically cannot defend themselves. It ought to be for those who have no voice of their own. The only voice they have, the only ones who can defend them, it's us. Lastly, these are the most pure and innocent amongst us. Let me repeat again, you may choose to look the other way, but never again can you say you did not know. Madam President, with that, I end my closing remarks and am happy to answer any questions.
The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I respectfully ask a ruling on whether the amendment before us is germane to the bill.
Senator McCoy, Senator Chapman, please come to the well. Senators, your point is well taken, Senator McCoy. The amendment before us unduly does expand the scope of the bill. The bill is very narrow in trying to only add the transgender population to the hate crime law.